Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Thriving Beyond MST. I'm your host, Dalia, and this is episode 4, Seeds of Solidarity. Thank you for being here. This episode holds deep personal meaning for me, both as a survivor and as someone who has spent many years navigating the military healthcare system as a provider myself. There's a lot to unpack in this episode, and I am so excited to share this with you. This episode is like a seed, not the kind that you bury and forget, but one that you want to water with truth, one that breaks through the silence, one that grows into collective healing. And we're planting it with lived experience. We're going to add a little bit of research, and most importantly, with solidarity. Today, for the first time on this podcast, I am welcoming a guest, a wonderful guest, and I'm so excited because I've known her for a while, and I couldn't have asked for a more trusted or insightful voice to join me today. This is a voice that many people are familiar with. Freyja is someone that I deeply admire, not just on a personal, but also on a professional level. Her and I met during our final assignment in Korea a few years ago, where I was the deputy chief of the Department of Hospital Education and Training. And at the time, Freyja's wife, Kat, was working alongside me in the department. And through that connection, we built a friendship, and it was grounded in just mutual respect, care, and conversation because we had a lot of similar interests. And so the kind of authenticity, it's hard to find, even in the military. Like myself, Freyja recently retired from the Army, so congratulations, Freyja. Since then, she has continued her service in a new form, working as a victim advocate for the Washington Army National Guard. Through every role that she has held, including this one thing has remained the same about Freyja. She has this unwavering commitment to survivors, and she has a determination to make the system safer. I invited Freyja here not just for her credentials, which are very important, but also because of her heart, her depth, and the clarity that she brings to conversations like this one. Before we begin, I do want to anchor this conversation in something critical. There was a recent study that I found. It was actually emailed to me. This study finally says out loud what many of us have lived quietly for so long. This is why it's so important. Earlier this year, in 2025, the PTSD Research Quarterly published a landmark article, and it's titled Suicide Risk in U.S. Military Veterans: Insights from the National Health and Resilience and Veterans Study. This is a collaboration between two powerhouses, the National Center for PTSD and the Yale School of Medicine. So I'm going to give you a couple of key highlights here before we begin. First, it draws a direct link between MST and suicide risk. It uses one of the largest, most rigorous data sets that we've ever had. It has 10 years of follow-up and thousands of veterans involved in this study. 2, it looks at the way that traumas stack. Traumas like childhood sexual abuse, combat trauma, moral injury, and MST. Not looking at them in isolation as each one in its own silo, but it actually puts them together and looks at them in layers. And this is something that I have not experienced with most of the providers that I have seen through the years that I've been getting therapy for MST. They usually look at those things separately, and they want to treat one thing at a time. And I continuously tell them, this is not working for me. This study is finally putting it together in a way I have been trying to explain it for so long. And number 3, it doesn't just name the risks, but it also lifts up lifelines. Things like purpose, gratitude, and connection. It names these as protective factors that now there's evidence behind this as well. But if you've done research or you know research, you know there are always limitations. So here are some of the things that it has left unsaid. 1, it barely touches on gender diverse veterans, pretty much the LGBTQIA+ community. And we know that they face disproportionate risk. 2, it largely overlooks non-VA care. So the very spaces that many MST survivors must turn to after separation. And this may be because there isn't as much awareness, as much training, and understanding outside of the military about how this specific population experiences these traumas. No surprise there, but still I feel they should focus a little bit more on that. And lastly, while it emphasizes prevention, it does miss deeper opportunities to examine exactly how psychosocial supports like belonging actually mitigate suicide risk. So there are your tidbits from me about this study. I hope that you will go and look for it and read it as well and form your own opinion. So let's get right into it. Freyja, I am delighted and grateful to have you here. I'd love to start by giving you the space to share a bit about your background. What led you to this work?
Thank you for inviting me to share my expertise and experiences. I have been a victim advocate within the military advocacy structure system for the past 10 years. I have been a full-time advocate since 2019. Prior to that, I did it on a volunteer basis as an additional duty. I have provided advocacy for multiple units and soldiers, sailors, airmen in the U.S. and overseas in Korea. And currently, I am working for the Washington National Guard as the victim advocate coordinator at the state level with oversight of training and credentialing for all the advocates in the state of Washington for the National Guard.
Okay. So you've held space for all branches of the military, some who may not have ever had an advocate before. And that kind of work changes lives. I wish that I had had someone like you when I was assaulted as a new airman. And I stayed silent because I was terrified to speak up. And I didn't have someone to advocate for me. I didn't know all the avenues. I was new to the military. And so the work that you do really changes lives. And I want to thank you for that.
I really, really appreciate hearing that, because the biggest reward that I get in being an advocate for survivors of violence is seeing people go from that victim to survivor and then become in a new thriving state. And seeing people thriving in their own authenticity is what brings me the greatest joy in the world.
That's awesome. I can attest to that. I've seen some of the changes in my own personal life and others as well who have been kind enough to share with me some of their stories. In my last episode, Uncovering the Cost of Silence, what happens when MST goes unspoken, I talked about the cost to the individual survivors, to the military, and to family and loved ones of survivors. So, Freyja, in your many years as a victim advocate, what were some of the hardest truths that you witnessed about survivors being silenced and or the challenges that stood out to you most when working with MST survivors?
I would say the greatest challenge that we as advocates have is when we are working with a survivor and we can see clearly a path that can lead them to thriving, and they're not ready to take it. And it is not our job to lead them, to push them along, to pull them. Our job is to restore autonomy, to give them their right to choose back. And sometimes it's very exhausting and frustrating to sit by and watch someone continue to engage in more harmful behaviors in their process and in their journey towards healing. But other than that, when we're talking about system problems, the military SAPR and SHARP programs have come a very, very long way from where they started. And I was serving before SAPR and SHARP even existed.
Yeah.
And so it's been a wonderful thing to see these programs come into place, grow and develop and become what they are now.
Sure.
But even in 2025, we have leaders across all spectrums of the military who still look at this and go, why do I need this program? This does not positively impact my service members' ability to be warfighters.
What a big misunderstanding, huh?
Right. And so I have to sit down and have these wonderful heart-to-heart conversations with these senior leaders and commanders that what we do is a force multiplier. What we do and what we create is an environment where all service members have a safe place to go and get the help they need so they can get back into the fight and be just as effective or more effective than they were before this most horrific event ever happened to them.
Right. Again, going back to my previous episode, one of the things that I touched on with, the cost of the military is that, people can't work in as a whole being. This takes so much from you that it's really difficult to be that proactive, soldier. It's more than a lot of people realize.
I actually would love to present two different ends of the spectrum that I've dealt with from leaders in my own personal experience. One was a leader who was so focused on the mission accomplishment that when one of my soldiers had something horrific happen to them, the leader constantly was asking the medical providers, the resource providers, the advocate professionals, how soon can I get this individual back to regular work? This leader was more focused, and I'll say she because it was a woman, was more focused on the soldier getting back to their day-to-day operation. And this soldier's healing process led her to leaving the military. On the other end of the spectrum, I had leaders in Korea that would look at soldiers who had been sexually assaulted and say, what can I do for you? How can I support you? And yes, I want you to take this time and I want you to heal. I want you to do whatever it is you need to do to be able to have space.
Yes. And it speaks volumes of a leader who is able to do that for their soldier or for their subordinate, because I think that even if not the whole unit will understand and will see that, it can be felt in the unit. I think a lot of times people will feel it when they have a leader who's supportive, who cares, who wants to do whatever they can to help that individual thrive. And the same for the other leader. People feel that tension in the unit, and it affects everyone, not just that one person who was a victim of MST. It affects people around them, the people they work with, their families, their extended families, their friends. Thank you for that example. What about those who had already experienced trauma before the military? What did those challenges look like for them?
The duty assignment where I had that most frequently was at Fort Sam Houston. And that was because I was dealing with soldiers that were going through their medical training. And so they did their 10 weeks of basic training. They get through all of that crazy madness, and then they get to start learning their medical skills. And there's enough time to slow down and start to process. And then they start actually paying attention to the sharp briefings, and they're paying attention to the training and the education. And then they start to have more authentic relationships with their peers. And all of a sudden things trigger past memories, past experiences, and they're in a space where they can share that. And then all of a sudden they're coming to us and they're saying, hey, this happened to me before I even joined. And
Sure.
And to have leaders in that training environment who would say, let's get you help. Let's get you in touch with resources. And so as the sharp professionals, we would get them in contact with law enforcement. We would get them over to behavioral health for counseling. We would have them talk to the chaplain if they wanted. And that they would even talk to legal advisors, the Special Victims Council, which is the military attorneys, to help advise them on how they can pursue an investigation of this incident that occurred sometimes many, many years ago.
Sure.
And a lot of times they were able to get to or much closer to a thriving state before they even graduated with their medical training expertise.
Got it. Yeah. So unfortunately, because this happened to me in 2007, and at that time, all those resources weren't available. People didn't talk about it like they talk about it now. Before I joined the military, I survived domestic violence. And during my time in the service, I went through it again. That's the part that I feel like people don't normally see when they just look at the uniform. Survivors aren't made in a single moment or from a single incident. We carry entire histories, and those past traumatic incidents added to the MST makes the trauma more complex. Over the years, I met many providers in and out of the military that didn't understand that, and so their approach, I feel, was often misinformed and unhelpful. This lack of perspective and understanding was re-traumatizing, and this is a salient point that I have personally discussed with other survivors who echo the same sentiment, who have similar interactions with providers.
Yes. When we look back in 2007 and that first incident that I was talking about with the leader who was constantly asking if the soldier could return to work, that occurred in about 2012, 2013. When I think back to 2007, gosh, we were still looking at the Wild Wild West early days of the SHARP program. And it had, in the Army and in the Air Force, they were still still trying to figure out how they were functioning. And one of the really good things about these programs is how they've grown. Because in 2007, if you were an Airman Basic going through training at Lackland and you speak up to your leadership, I mean, what's their response? Go back to work, trainee,
Yes.
You need to learn here. And as someone who was a victim advocate at Joint Base San Antonio and pulled the hotline duties for the entire Joint Base on a quarterly basis, I can say with complete certainty that now airmen going through basic training have the same accessibility to sapper professionals as soldiers going through their advanced medical training or full-time service members anywhere at that Joint Base. And I know this because I would take the phone calls when I was on the hotline from those airmen calling from the laundry room where they have the little hotline phones and reaching out for support. And I would be able to link them up with an Air Force victim advocate within an hour. And within 24 hours, they're being able to decide if they want to file a report. What kind of report do they want to file? What kind of resources do they want to receive? And is this going to in any way impact their ability to continue progressing through training at the same rate that they were or their peers are?
Sure. That's really great to hear. Because, I think back sometimes at that little airman, didn't know anything and how scared she was. And now to hear that there are these resources, that there's a hotline phone in the laundry room, those are huge steps towards the right direction.
Yes.
In your experience, what are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about how the military handles MST cases?
Two biggest misconceptions is two different ends of the spectrum. You have the people that think that sexual assault is this horrifically systemic problem within the military that is so much worse than it is in the civilian sector. And then you have individuals both within and without the military that think that it's not a problem. And if we just change the way that the units are organized or the personnel in them, then it will completely not be a problem altogether. And those two misconceptions absolutely are detrimental to the mission of Sapper and Sharp, in the fact that the military is a microcosm of the entire population in the United States. We're talking about 1% or less of the U.S. population.
Sure.
And people within all branches of the military and uniformed services come from all different walks of life. And this means that we have people with a very diverse background coming together and learning how to work together. And they bring those problems from home with them.
Right. Or those cultures or those backgrounds or those things that have been passed down from generation to generation. And they all come and are put into this bucket altogether.
Right. I would say that the biggest thing the military does that the civilian sector does not have is with Sapper and Sharp, we have created an environment where, because our service members are in very unfamiliar space, joining the military and going through training, and it's very stressful, that they have opportunities to have triggers of past trauma, but then they also are being told on a regular basis, these are the resources available to you and you can use this. And all of a sudden, it's just like, I can go over here and talk to this victim advocate and I can start the healing process to become a whole person again. And so that this being a misconception that it's so much more prolific within the military is absolutely not true. It happens in the military just as much as it happens in the civilian sector. The difference is we report it, we create space to report it, and the SAPR and SHARP programs have been very, as we say, leaning forward in the foxhole. They're always on the front with how can we have a program that provides the most resources, accessibility, and knowledge to our service members, because at the end of the day, one of my biggest goals is to be able to change the culture in the entire United States. And the biggest challenge I have with that is most Americans do not want military sexual assault prevention programs in middle schools and high schools. They want to be able to handle that themselves as parents. But the problem is a lot of these parents who are fighting against sexual assault prevention and consent training programs in lower education, elementary, middle, and high school, these are the people who experienced it or committed it throughout their lives. And they're just like, well, I turned out fine, so maybe what's good for the goose is good for the gander, but that's not always true. And we have to end the cycle of abuse, and the best way to do that is through education.
Let's talk about what happens when systems fail. Okay. And I think you touched on this a little bit. As an advocate, what were some ways you navigated challenges when policy or chain of command created limitations? And how did you keep survivors at the center?
As an advocate, my job is not to speak for marginalized communities, victimized individuals, or group of people that I'm advocating for. My job is not to speak for them because I have not experienced their experience. My experiences are absolutely different than theirs. My job is to create space for them to speak their truth. And when I would run into leaders, commanders, senior enlisted leaders, anyone who was not entirely supportive of service members receiving all the care they needed, sometimes I'm going to pull out policy and say, hey, in accordance with this regulatory guidance on this page, it states this is the bare minimum of what you're required to do. And if you don't do that, then you are in violation of the commander's policy. So it is my duty to notify the commander, advise the commander that one of their leaders is not in compliance with the command policy. I'm not there to tell them what to do. I'm there to advise, assist, and keep them out of trouble. And at the end of the day, that's one of the biggest things. I have to build rapport and gain trust, not just from my clients, but also from the leaders within the organization. Because as a victim advocate in the military, you're more than just advocating for victims. You're also advising commanders on how they can stay out of trouble and how they can best take care of their service members. So having the ability to establish trust, to be able to demonstrate to them that I'm thinking of their service members' needs, health and welfare first and foremost, helps me gain their trust. And when I have that trusting relationship, then I can get the commander's buy-in and support to be able to get these service members the help that they need. I would say the biggest challenge with failure of systems comes into play when I'm working with non-military entities, with our sister services in the community. Because civilian resources do not always have the same resources and services available across the board that absolutely can get in the way of providing the advocacy we want to. And so as an advocate, I'm also responsible for understanding local, state, and federal laws and regulations.
Yes.
So that I can look at if my client is not receiving the support they need, where can I get them the support? An example that I have is when I was stationed in Korea, my sister, who is a special victims counsel, would occasionally reach out to me for support for clients that were not receiving the advocacy that they deserved based upon certain demographics. Let's just be honest, they were within the LGBTQIA plus community, and these individuals were not receiving the support they needed because their local advocates did not have the same values that I do, that everyone deserves equitable advocacy.
Sure.
And so my sister would reach out to me and I would be looking at, okay, what resources are available, and looking in these rural communities in many different states. Oftentimes they do not want or have the capability to provide the services that someone who falls within the LGBTQIA plus community is looking for. And I have to be able to look in the greater area and see what resources are available, because I can't change the system overnight. Changing systems is a very difficult thing, but I can look what other systems are available as an advocate. And that's important for all advocates, to not just say, I'm sorry, but to say, let me look into that.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you sharing that perspective, because, it opens up a understanding of what your role is and how challenging it is for you too.
It's even more complicated when you're overseas and you're dealing with foreign countries and their laws and regulations. Korea was a special, unique challenge.
I remember. So it is easy to see that you're very passionate about your calling. This is a calling for you, not just a career. I'd like to know how that emotional weight of this work impacted you over time, and what has helped you stay grounded.
As I said, the number one thing that fills me up with joy and happiness is seeing survivors become thrivers, seeing people thriving in their new normal. And I like to always tell them that this is going to be a new normal, because you're never going to get back to the way it was. I also have to make sure that I take care of myself. And if a client's story, experience that they are sharing with me triggers something in me, that I am doing what I need to take care of myself so I can continue helping them, or I need to recuse myself from their advocacy and hand them off to someone who can provide the advocacy that they deserve. In the Sapper and Sharp communities, we are constantly talking about self-care and resiliency. And what we hear most often is, what are you doing for your self-care?
Yes.
And I like to rephrase that. I like to completely rephrase that, because self-care is not an individual responsibility and effort. Self-care takes a community. It takes a team. And so I like to teach people to build the team that is going to help them maintain their self-care before they need it. You need to have people in there who are going to provide mentorship, that are going to cheer you along, that are going to point out your own faults. You need people that are going to lift you up, and people who are willing to crawl into that dark space and sit with you.
Yes.
And sometimes you need that person that's your dopamine for the day, who's just going to put a smile back on your face and revitalize you so you can finish the task at hand.
Yes, that's great. And I know that we had a little bit of a conversation before this interview, and you touched on how family keeps you grounded. And yes. I think that is super important.
And I would hope that all individuals in the advocacy community providing support for victims of any crime have a supportive family. Because we wouldn't expect our clients to go at it alone. We can't go at it alone. And having your family members there to sometimes kick you in the pants and get you moving again, or sometimes there to pick you up, dust you off, and help you keep going, depending upon what you need. And sometimes your family, those closest and most dear to your heart, are the ones that can also stop and say, hey, you need to take a break.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. In your view, is there anything else or some changes that need to be made on a systems level to truly support MST prevention and survivor recovery?
Unfortunately, I see a lot of the systems that are currently in place under scrutiny. And when we look at the current federal administration removing DEI, I can understand the perspective of how people see it being harmful. But I truly believe that comes from a position of a lack of education and understanding of what DEI is and what DEI does. And when we talk about survivors of trauma, DEI is absolutely critical for the healing process. Because when we talk about DEI, we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we're looking at every single person who walks through my door or interacts with me deserves the same level of care, compassion, understanding, empathy, and concern.
Sure.
Every single one of them, regardless of what background they have, regardless of what happened to them, regardless of if they remember exactly what happened or not. None of that
Sure.
matters. What matters is I need to be there to support them. When we talk about equity, that means everyone deserves not the same level of care, because some clients want me to check in every day. Some clients want me to check in every week. And I've had clients that are like, you know what? Once a month is fine. And I'm at that point where I just want you to make sure that I'm not slipping back.
Okay.
But we need to be able to provide equitable services that provide the resources and support that each diverse individual needs to be able to get to their thriving state.
Absolutely.
And that leads to inclusion, because we need to include everybody who needs support. We need to include all the resource providers as well, so that everyone has a huge list of resources that they can select from a la carte.
Right. Yes. And it's so dangerous when things like this are looked at from like a one-sided perspective, and they don't consider all of these points you just made. So what would you want current victim advocates or command teams to hear from someone who's been there in their shoes, who has seen all of these experiences that you've shared?
Currently, in March, April, what are we at? April 2025, right? Yes. Sorry, it's been a whirlwind of a year already, and it's only the 4th month.
Absolutely.
I would say right now, don't give up hope. Don't give up on your passion, because none of us stay in this field unless we're passionate about it. And everyone who looks at what we do and says, my gosh, that is so hard. For us, it isn't, because our heart and soul are in this.
Yes.
And this helps us be the people that we are.
Yes.
So to all the advocates out there, don't give up hope. Hope is amazing. Hope is what inspires us to keep going and making things better for everyone.
Yes, I appreciate that. And it's easy to see when someone has this passion for what they're doing, and you can see the impact of what they do. This brings me to my next point. Even in the gaps, we plant seeds of change, of courage, of connection. So let's talk more about purpose and how purpose becomes power. In the study, it says that purpose in life emerged as the single strongest protective factor against suicide. It explained that nearly 30% of the difference between veterans who attempted suicide and those who didn't was having purpose in their life. In light of everything that we've discussed, why do you believe that Suicide Awareness and Prevention Month is still crucial today? And what do people still need to see or hear from this?
So in the lead up to your question, you said something very, very important. In the study, it says that individuals who feel that they have purpose have a much lower likelihood of suicidal ideations. And I want to bring to light the correlation, because we know that victims of sexual assault, whether it be in the military or not, have a higher tendency for suicidal ideations. Why is that? I mean, to me, it's clear as day. Because you're struggling with your healing process. You're struggling with coming to terms with what happened to you on the most horrific day of your life. And for a lot of survivors, this leads to questioning whether or not they messed up. Was this my fault? Especially when we look in the military, every single Friday, we have commanders and first sergeants saying, don't stay out late. Don't go to the club by yourself. Don't drink too much. Watch your drink. Oh, and don't dress provocatively. And I have to remind them that we are pre-victimizing people before anything happens. And we are putting these thoughts in their head that if anything happens, it was their fault.
Because they did one of those things.
They did one or more of those things. But what do we do when we go out on a Friday? We've had a rough week. We wanted to go to the club. We want to have a drink or two to relax, and we want to dance and let loose some steam. We want to be able to talk to our friends and meet some people, right? And all of those things are perfectly valid things to do.
Yes.
Every individual should be able to walk naked at 2 a.m, drunk as a skunk, down any main street in America. And the only thing that should happen to them is someone should come up and say, hey, let's get you inside where it's warm, get some clothes on you, and get you sobered up and get you some rest.
Yes.
But nowhere in that interaction should it be, ooh, I'm going to sexually assault this person because they're vulnerable. That's predatory behavior.
Absolutely.
Sexual Assault Awareness and Prevention Month is still crucial today because sexual assault is still a problem in every community across this world. And you cannot tell me that any community does not suffer from this in some way. Most survivors who are sexually assaulted prior to military service share with us that the individual who sexually assaulted them was a close friend or family member. Within the military environment, most sexual assaults occur due to someone that the survivor knew. It is someone they knew and someone they thought they could trust. The myth that some stranger is jumping out from behind a bush or out of a dark alley almost never happens. The myth that people are being assaulted with deadly weapons almost never happens. More often than not, it is the simplicity of understanding the effects of alcohol on a human being and taking advantage of another human being and stealing their right to choose.
Yes, and that's such a big betrayal.
Yes.
Because, like you said, it's someone you know, it's someone that you confided in, that you trusted, that you interacted with.
And honestly, I hate Sexual Assault Awareness and Prevention Month for one reason, because so many people will bring great awareness all through the month of April. They're pulling out their purple and their teal. They're dyeing their hair and wearing beautiful clothes and getting online and talking about this. And then the month is over and everyone forgets. And my favorite hashtag is not just April, because this matters every month, every day of the year.
Exactly. Yes. 365 days. No, I think that that's very valid. And, you know, as a survivor myself, this affects me every month, you know?
Mm-hmm.
When the month of the incident is about to come up, I can already start feeling very anxious. And I just go through these physical and emotional changes. And it's not easy to, you know, explain to everybody else. A lot of times it's on a daily that I go through things like this.
A lot of people don't realize that survivors of sexual violence have experienced trauma. They do have PTSD in different degrees. And trauma changes our physiology and can change our epigenetics. This changes the way we think, the way we behave, and even changes things as simple as you're having a hard time losing those extra 10, 20 pounds. Maybe it's because your body is pumping out trauma response hormones when it's not supposed to, and that makes it 10 times harder for you to keep the weight off. We can learn so much more about that through the book, The Deepest Well by Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, who talks so much about how ACEs impact people through their entire life if it's not addressed and treated early on, which is why victim advocates are so critical, because we help survivors get the help they need as early as possible.
Yes.
So that we can avoid those long-term changes that make it that much harder to heal and reach a true thriving state.
Right. Piggybacking on what you're saying now, I'd like to ask people, like, what do you think are some of the unique factors in the military that make this more challenging to deal with? And you mentioned one being, well, now you have to do height and weight, and you're criticized because you can't lose the 10 pounds when people don't understand that there's something else creating these responses in your body that make it harder. Can you speak more to those unique military factors that impact this special population?
Absolutely. Within the military, service members are absolutely judged. Their leadership ability is often, and yes, we make light of this, but there's so much truth in the jokes, that we judge an individual's leadership abilities on the way that they look in uniform and how fast they can run 2 miles.
Yes.
We have a majority of females in the military service who struggle through their entire career with meeting weight standards that are stated that they're founded in scientific studies that were conducted in the 30s and 50s, and they haven't changed since the 50s and 60s. And they expect these soldiers to look like they should be able to walk for a fashion show and then turn around and deadlift 180 pounds 3 times? No, you can't expect someone to be a weightlifter, a distance runner, and America's top model. It does not work.
Yes.
It's very much like when I was going into college and they said, okay, you can study, you can sleep, and you can party, but you only get to do 2 per semester. And it's the same thing in the military. You can look good, you can lift up heavy things, and you can run fast, but you only get to do 2 at a time. But you have to do all 3 to be an effective leader in the eyes of the military.
Yes. And some of the other factors that I've noticed in the military, you're PCSing every so often. People are coming and going all the time. It's this revolving door. So it's hard to really establish people that you feel safe around, that you can trust. Once MST has happened, there's this heightened state of anxiety and other things going on that having you change duty station, there's no stability. You're away from your support networks. Those things also create a barrier to your healing.
So I definitely want to talk about that because that's absolutely true. Within the active component, moving around and having to constantly change your support network, making new friends is a very re-traumatizing or challenging part, and it makes the healing process that much harder. Now, within the active component and reserve and guard, they have what is called expedited transfer for survivors of sexual assault. And an expedited transfer provides a survivor who is struggling to heal the option to elect to move to a different duty station where they may be near friends or family or closer to friends or family that can help them need to be able to heal. Now, this is a fantastic thing, but once again, now you're having this individual who was sexually assaulted in an environment where they developed friendships and close networks. And all of a sudden you're telling them, hey, so we have this option where you can leave this place where you feel you have trust, where you spent the last 2 years building relationships. Where do you want to go? And a lot of times the answer that we would get is, I don't. Why should I have to leave? I didn't commit the crime. I had the crime committed to me.
Sure.
And of course, military justice, just like civilian justice, an offender is only guilty until proven guilty in a court of law. And so we can't move the offender until we prove that they were guilty of the crime.
I can't imagine how difficult it is. Like you said, you've started to build a community somewhere and this horrific thing happens to you and you are the one that has to move or have the option to, but that's the only way that you're going to get away from your perpetrator.
Right. Now, on the flip side, I really want to address the fact that we have reserve and guard service members across the country. Sometimes they don't move through their entire career.
Right.
They don't have to. So you have individuals who have lifelong friendships in their unit.
Right.
And then all of a sudden they get assaulted and their entire support network is just completely disintegrated in an instant because everyone that they thought would be there to support them and defend them and take care of them wasn't there or was there and it was the one causing the offense.
Right.
And they have expedited transfers in the National Guard and Reserves, but it's not on the same level. It doesn't have the same abilities because in the military, expedited transfer, the military is going to pay for you to move. In the Guard, that doesn't happen. And now they have to consider Can I afford to move?
Right.
Can I afford to change my civilian job? Can I find a new job? And how far can I go? And sometimes that requires coordination between states. And we don't have enough resources available to be able to support survivors in the Guard and Reserve that are available on the active duty side.
And that's a great point. I hadn't really considered that perspective. One of the things that I did experience was that my attacker was also in the medical field. And so there was always that thought in the back of my mind, what if he comes to where I am? Or what if I go to a different clinic or hospital and he's working there? What if he becomes my patient? Or even worse, what if I become his patient and he's the one treating me? There's also that component that's specific to the military. And it was really difficult. You mentioned something about the perpetrators. You have to prove that they are guilty for them to face consequences. It's very difficult to process. I think that sometimes survivors struggle with, like, should I say something or should I stay quiet? Because if I stay quiet, maybe I'm protecting myself. But if I say something, is this going to be used against me in any way? Or is anything going to happen to the person who attacked me?
Right.
So how do you deal with situations like that?
As a victim advocate, I get to take a survivor's story at face value. I get to hear their story and not pass judgment. I'm not there for the legal portion. I'm not there for the investigative portion. I'm there for the resource management and support. I'm there to advocate for them. I'm there to sit beside them and share that space from the point where they're ready to ask for help until they say that they are ready to go fly on their own. And sometimes that means going with them when they are doing an interview with law enforcement personnel. Sometimes that means sitting right there with them while they're in the court trial.
Yes.
And I don't have to figure out if they're telling the truth or not. Doesn't matter. Something happened, and I don't need to know exactly what happened. I need to know that they are hurting, they want help, and I have access to resources that I can use to help them.
Yes. So if you could speak directly to MST survivors listening to this episode, what would you say? What would your message be?
Trust us. All too often, people get confused as to what the role of the victim's advocate is and what we do. They see us, especially within the military, they see us interacting with the command and with law enforcement and think that we're telling the command all the secrets. One of the greatest things about my job is I get to keep all the secrets. I don't have to tell anyone anything. And one of my favorite things when I was still working as a brigade level advocate in SARC was looking commanders dead in the eyes and saying, that's none of your business.
I wish I could do that.
Right? The absolute power as a sergeant first class to look at a full-bird colonel or a command sergeant major and say, you do not have a need to know. Because at the end of the day, when they would come to me and they would say, can you tell me if this soldier was with you? I can't sit there and allude because we know how that happens. Then all of a sudden they're like, oh, well, what were they? No. Whether or not that happened, you do not have the need to know. And when you have a need to know, I will inform you of everything that you need to know, because there are two things that guarantee that I'm going to keep my secrets. Number one is I like what I do, and I have to be credentialed to do what I do. And those credentials come with a code of ethics. And that code of ethics tells me that victims' rights are my foremost concern.
Yes.
The second thing is within the Uniform Code of Military Justice, we have Military Rule of Evidence 514. And Military Rule of Evidence 514 says there is confidentiality between victims and victim advocates only limited by harm to self or others, or in cases where you have a serial offender and we have safety and welfare of the entire unit, then we need to go do something. But if we have to make that kind of disclosure, we are only going to tell the command exactly what they need to know so that they can take action to protect their formation after consulting with legal. Even if a judge comes to me and says, you must go to court, and subpoenas me, I walk over to legal and I say, hey, I just got this subpoena and I would like your assistance. And legal looks at it and they review it and they say, you know what? I got this. And then they go to court for me and say, this is what you need to know. And that's it. Sometimes they'll go with me to court, or sometimes they'll tell me exactly what I'm going to say. And I walk in there and read a script and walk out. Because at the end of the day, I cannot be called to testify in a military trial by court-martial. Now, on the civilian side, and this is a challenge I have as a National Guard victim advocate, is that not every state has the same laws and regulations. And not every state has victim advocate confidentiality. And that is really, really important to keep in mind if a sexual assault occurred outside of a military federal installation, because if it is investigated by civilian law enforcement, it's going to be tried in a civilian court. And if the civilian law, for example, like the state of Texas, does not have the same level of victim advocate confidentiality that the military has,
Sure,
your advocate may be called to testify.
that's
and they
interesting.
need to let you know that beforehand. And a lot of times the advocates that work strictly for the military do not know what the state code states as far as victim advocate confidentiality. But I had the wonderful opportunity of interning with the National Crime Victims Law Institute in Portland, Oregon for my last 90 days in service. And I discovered how easy it is to reach out to them and say, hey, I'm here. This is my situation. What legally can I provide and do for my client within the state code? And they will have answers.
Nice. That's awesome. You got that experience.
Yeah. Learning from attorneys who advocate for survivors of crime was also a very wonderful experience that helped broaden my knowledge and education for supporting survivors.
Yes, if only more victim advocates would do all that you're doing.
I try to make sure that everyone knows that there are all these different resources available in different areas and avenues where we can learn and grow as advocates to be better providers for our client survivors.
Absolutely. And that brings us to our final moments together. Freyja, I want to thank you for holding this space with me, for speaking truth, for reminding us that we are not we're not the broken ones. Sometimes it's the system that's broken.
You're very welcome. And I'm very grateful that you invited me in this month to speak with you on such an important topic and be able to share my perspective and experience with everyone who's listening. And I hope that people who are listening understand that we are 100% here to support in every way that we can. And if there is ever an advocate that is not providing the best services possible, ask for another one.
I was going to say, go find another one. Go find Freyja.
So I'm currently working in Washington, and I plan on staying in the Pacific Northwest for the rest of my working years. I love it out here. It's not that southeastern humidity that creates the frizzy hair that drove me nuts for so many years. And I love looking up and seeing mountains and trees, even if one day they will erupt and be a volcano that kills us in a horrible death. But you know what? It's better than dying in a hurricane, in my opinion.
All right. Hopefully we'll get to talk to you again.
Absolutely. I look forward to the opportunity.
I'm going to leave you with one last takeaway from the study I referenced in this episode. It turns out that telling your story, finding your purpose, and being in community isn't just healing. It's life-saving. Now, this podcast may not be the therapy in the orthodox way we tend to think of therapy, but it might be the first thing someone hears that makes them feel seen or heard. And sometimes that's the crack where light starts to make its way in. If this conversation spoke to you, please share it with a friend, a fellow veteran, a provider, a policymaker, and if you're able, join us at the TASA 2025 conference held from June 30th to July 2nd of 2025 in Denton, Texas. I will be presenting Seeds of Solidarity, empowering voices through the Thriving Beyond MST podcast, and I would be extremely honored to see you there. If you haven't already, please subscribe to Thriving Beyond MST, follow the show, and leave us a review. Before we close, there are a few important resources. If you want to reach the Veterans Crisis Line, dial 988, then press 1. For the National Sexual Assault Hotline, the number is 1-800-656-4673. And the SAFE helpline for DoD survivors can be reached at 1-877-995-5247. We see you, we honor you, and we will not stop fighting until there are no more stories like yours. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other, and know that you are not alone. Together, we thrive beyond MST. Thank you.